On April 11, 1970, in Guzheng County, Anhui, people from all over scrambled to gather in an open field at the county gate tower and rushed to watch an unprecedented public sentencing. People were jostling each other, standing on tiptoe to see the podium. Kneeling up there with hands tied behind her back was a woman in her 40s, with short hair and pale skin. When my mother was brought there under escort, she was brought by the PLA, fully armed. A wood sign was hung over my mother's neck. I saw it for myself. It said, Fang Zhongmou, an active counter-revolutionary, and there was a red cross through her name. This sign, there on her knees. She suddenly got up with her knees. The venue was packed with people. It claimed to be 10,000 people. When she was on the podium, they grabbed her hair and pressed her head down and told her to confess her guilt to the revolutionary masses. My mother suddenly moved her neck, turned her head, and looked up again. In the midst of the hustle and bustle, a 16-year-old boy also watched the woman on the podium awaiting sentencing. She was his mother. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to see her again. But I couldn't avoid it, even if I wanted to. Having given it a second thought, I went there reluctantly after taking this step. So many people were around at that time. The woman kneeling on the ground, did you think it was your mother? It is my mother. She wasn't terrifying in appearance anymore and became a human being. My mother. On April 11, 1970, there were crowds of people in Guzheng County, Anhui. In this very little remote town where big things rarely happened, the day was more spectacular than the holiday season. And in the county records later, this day left a significant chapter, because on this day, a woman was being tried publicly. She was once a nurse in the Guzheng County Hospital called Fang Zhongmou. Late at night on the 8th day of the Lunar New Year 1970, Fang Zhongmou was bound and carried from her home and was later sentenced to execution for anti-revolutionary offenses. In the midst of the Cultural Revolution, she was also the first anti-revolutionary in Guzheng County to be executed under the death penalty, and the case here caused a big stir locally. There was another very particular reason. It was Fang Zhongmou's husband and son who reported her and sent her to trial. And they made it completely clear to the party to be sure to execute Fang Zhongmou, the devil with a terrifying appearance. Where the most righteous and the most resolute was the oldest son of Fang Zhongmou, the one who looked on in her final moments from far off in the crowd, the 16-year-old boy, Zhang Hongbing. When pronouncing the judgment, the entire venue was quiet. 16-year-old Zhang Hongbing heard it clearly, sentenced to death, immediate execution. The soldiers pulled my mother into a car and she was carrying a death flag on her back. It was the death flag of ancient murder. There was a red circle on it. She was taken to the execution yard. The yard was located on the east bank of the 38 River in Guzheng County, about 2 kilometers from the county seat, where there was a low-lying field in the wilderness. Fang Zhongmou was bound and placed on a truck. People were chasing and running behind the truck, and were afraid of missing the moment of the execution. It was a dusty road. Zhang Hongbing's footsteps were heavy as he walked through the crowd. I really didn't go to the execution yard and watch the bloody scene where my mother was shot to death. I really couldn't bear to see it. I was far away. You were afraid to look at her in her eyes. Yes. At the end of his mother's life, it was difficult to describe Zhang Hongbing's innermost complex emotions. Before sentencing, he had thought his mother was a devil. But the moment that life and death came, in the nature of this juvenile, some dust-covered instincts welled up in his heart again. One night, in summer, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. And I told my mother that I was afraid. I was 3 years old at that time. My mother said, "Child, don't be afraid. We'll shut the door and it will be okay. Mom is here with you." While hand-washing the clothes, she sang to me. It was lovely. The north wind blows. The snowflakes float. The snowflakes float and float. The end of the year comes. It left a deep impression on me. It was a lovely evening.
真是一个温馨的夜晚。
From a loving mother to a devil with a terrifying appearance, my mother changed all of a sudden. And all of this change just happened overnight. A quirky black night. February 13th, 1970, the 8th day of the Lunar New Year. It was the most unforgettable day in Zhang Hongbing's life. After dinner that day, as usual, Zhang Hongbing was doing the dishes. Fang Zhongmou was hand-washing her husband's and son's clothes. And then the family conducted family discussions and studies on the Cultural Revolution. However, Fang Zhongmou and her husband, Zhang Yusheng, suddenly argued. At that time, my mother was in her bedroom, picked up a barefoot physician's manual. There was a quote from Mao Zedong printed on it. "The elite are most ignorant. The lowly are most intelligent." She pointed at those words and said, "These were somebody else's words quoted by Mao Zedong." "You aren't denigrating our great leader, Chairman Mao, are you? How could quotations from Chairman Mao be someone else's?" I might have called her by name. I said, "Fang Zhongmou, you can't use grammar questions to attack the great leader, Chairman Mao." 16-year-old Zhang Hongbing was one of the most active Red Guards in the compound. Before the Cultural Revolution, Zhang Hongbing had not graduated from elementary school. He joined the study group on Chairman Mao's writings and deeply worshipped Chairman Mao. At that time, my mother, Fang Zhongmou, was regarded as a spy suspect and of the landlord class, and was isolated for more than a year at the county hospital. To correct his mother's wrong thinking, Zhang Hongbing immediately criticized her. But that night, his mother, who had never been argumentative, yet her rhetoric was getting more and more intense. The first thing she said was, "I just want to reverse the verdict for Liu Shaoqi." This was a big deal. I couldn't tolerate my mother anymore. From that moment, the family discussion on views of the Cultural Revolution became a struggle session. The talk was endless. All we knew was from the words of the editorials from 2 newspapers and 1 magazine. The traitor, mole, and scab Liu Shaoqi was locked in a prison and shot to death. And you're reversing the verdict for him? And then my mother said one thing that shocked us all. Why does Mao Zedong have a cult of personality? His images are everywhere. This became an even bigger deal. She pointed an accusing finger directly at Mao Zedong. As her voice died away, the family was horrified. Attacking and denigrating the great leader, such reactionary behavior was enough to bring on the harshest punishment. We often saw notices posted on the wall of executing people by shooting for attacking and denigrating Chairman Mao and Chairman Lin Biao. Sentenced to death, immediate execution. In the middle of the notices, they used a big brush pen with red ink and drew a big red checkmark. That late night at Zheng's house was like a boat in a tempestuous storm. A great fear hit the family of Fang Zhongmou. The Fang Zhongmou they were familiar with was an outstanding member of the party and was always politically correct. Yet that night, This woman was a stranger to them. This person in front of you at this time, it wasn't my mother. She became an active counter-revolutionary and became a class enemy. It was because of those two words? That's right. It was a devil with a terrifying appearance, gazing with a bloody mouth at that moment. This is a very old selected works of Mao Zedong. It's probably the first edition after the liberation. She wrote the notes about her learning, serving the people. Years after the execution of his mother, why she changed that night was always a mystery in the heart of Zhang Hongbing. Because before that, the impression his mother left on Zhang Hongbing had always been a dedicated medical worker and a pious revolutionary. In 1949, Fang Zhongmou, aged 23, followed her father, Fang Zhongmou, an underground party member of CCP, and participated in the revolution. She joined the Communist Party's army and served as a nurse, participated in the Yangtze River crossing campaign, and won third-class merit once and the model worker. After the Chinese Civil War, Fang Zhongmou met and fell in love with a PLA cadre named Zhang Yusheng. However, during this period, Fang Zhongmou's father, and the underground party member, was classified as a landlord and a spy, and was executed in the land reform campaign. However, this didn't affect Fang Zhongmou's future. She and Zhang Yusheng changed jobs in the same year. Her husband was the head of the health department in Shozhou. Fang Zhongmou served as the head nurse of the county specialized hospital and then served as the deputy head of the nursing department. In 1956, she was also rated as a socialist activist in Anhui. A rural pregnant woman lost too much blood and her life was in danger. She gave her blood to this pregnant woman and went back home and cooked some egg noodles for her. A small boy got diphtheria, a potent infectious disease, because his throat was blocked by sputum. It seemed life-threatening. To save the child, mouth to mouth, she sucked the sputum out from the sick child's mouth and saved him. After marriage, Fang Zhongmou and Zhang Yusheng raised 3 children. Zhang Hongbing is the second, and he also has a sister and a brother. Zhang Hongbing didn't go by this name when he was little. He was called Zhang Taifu. In his childhood memory, his parents had a harmonious relationship. Their mother loved them so much. It was the happiest time of his life. When I had a fever, my mother came to touch my head at night to see if it was still hot. She wiped my head with ethyl alcohol and wiped my palms and my armpits to cool me physically. So did my father. He touched me with his warm, big hands. Returning from Beijing, my father bought me a bus model. Its lower section was red and its upper section was yellow. We were so excited. We 3 siblings sat on the steps of the county auditorium. Those steps were very long. We drove on them. Then we went to Greensward to pick the wildflowers. In 1966, the Cultural Revolution broke out. Zhang Taifu graduated from the elementary school that year. On August 18th, Mao Zedong inspected 1 million Red Guards at Tiananmen Square. Song Bingbing, a secondary schoolgirl in Beijing, was received by Mao Zedong as a Red Guard representative. Song Bingbing, a Red Guard of the girls' middle school attached to BNU, put on the Red Guard's armband for Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao asked what her name was. She said it was Song Bingbing. Chairman Mao asked if it was a bin, as in Wenxi Binbin. She said yes. Chairman Mao said she would use Yawu. 2 days later, this conversation, titled as "I Put on a Red Armband for Chairman Mao," was published in the People's Daily, signed Song Yawu. She changed her name. I was excited to see it. I also had to change my name. What was the best? It should be Hongbing, Red Soldier, the most immediate and the loudest name. My sister changed her name too. She changed it herself. She changed to Chang Dai Hong, which means the tradition of revolution inherited from generation to generation, generations of red. Once we changed our name, it caused a big stir and affected the whole group of children. Mommy and Daddy can't compare with Chairman Mao. From here, Zhang Taifu became Zhang Hongbing. From an innocent child loving toy cars, he became a little red guard interested in revolution. At the beginning, for the children's passion for revolution, both Fang Zhongmou and Zhang Yusheng were very supportive. In the front wall of the central room in our house was the picture of Chairman Mao Zedong and Chairman Liu Shaoqi, which were hung side by side. My father said to me, "You bring a stool." He pointed to the picture of Liu Shaoqi. "Take that down and move Mao Zedong's picture to the center." I went to the Xinhua bookstore and bought lots of handwriting and poetry of Mao Zedong. Like Song Sun Turns Yellow from the Wind and Rain, 5 or 6 of them. I posted them on the walls. They were all pleased. The red storm blew from Beijing to the small county town soon after. When it finally happened to everyone, it wasn't romantic at all. His father, Zhang Yusheng, was the first to bear the brunt. The hospital of Guzheng County was classified as a number 1 bourgeois establishment. He was put in a dunce hat for a parade and struggle sessions. And then in the big character posters, Zhang Hongbing learned for the first time that in 1951 his grandpa was classified as a landlord and a spy and executed. Zhang Hongbing, regarding himself as a child of the revolutionary cadre, was locked into unprecedented loss and pain. Not long after, there was another big character poster in the compound criticizing Zhang Yusheng, signed Zhang Hongbing. I carved a long gun myself with wood. After my father saw it, he was not pleased. "I've had enough with guns in the army. You play guns." I can't help but say I cried and made a fuss. He took the gun and broke it. At that time, this was a crime. I magnified it to be a question of principle. Chairman Mao said, "Political power comes out of the barrel of a gun. You broke my gun. You broke my gun." His father, Zhang Yusheng, also saw this big character poster. However, he did not blame Zhang Hongbing. Instead, he was polite to his son. He said he had gone to school for only 3 years and hadn't much knowledge, and often asked his primary school son to help analyze whatever mistakes he made. Even when his inspection report couldn't pass, he had asked Zhang Hongbing to write it on his behalf. When some old neighbors in the compound saw that this juvenile had denounced his father, it was complicated. "So your father wasn't upset at you at all? How could a child write a big character poster about me?" No. This was the trend of society. People were all doing it. I think he treated me as an equal. After posting a big character poster, I was recognized by the rebels. Was it important to get their recognition? Very important. Because I was like them. I was a revolutionary too. During the struggle session for Zhang Yusheng, Fang Zhongmou was regarded as a filthy wife of a capitalist roader and was often pulled out to the struggle session too. Zhang Hongbing, age 13, stood before the podium and watched his parents be criticized. My father kneeled in the middle of the venue, bowing his head to the revolutionary masses. They asked my mother to get on her knees. She refused firmly. Then they punched and kicked my father, and my mother warded off their blows with her arms to protect my father. Zhang Yusheng was injured in his leg by a bomb during the anti-Japanese war. After the struggle session, he couldn't feel his legs. Fang Zhongmou accompanied her husband in silence, and together they stumbled home in the dark. I remember it vividly. Since I could remember, I've never seen my father and mother walk so close like this.
他们没有搀
They
手，
didn't hold their hands, no hand in hand, but they were very close. It was almost shoulder to shoulder. It was this time instead, two people walking shoulder to shoulder, left a deep impression on you. Yes, I come to think of it now.
还历历在
It
目
is。still vivid.
他回家以后
When
就觉得
returning
自己
home,
的
he felt some pain in his kidney,
疼痛，然后
and
就
there was
尿
blood
血
in
了
his urine.
父亲
My father began to cry,
流眼泪了，母亲呢
and my mother was there to comfort him,
安慰他，说
and said, "You should let this go.
开一点，哎，你
This
算
is
什么
nothing."
呀？彭德
Marshal
彭德
Peng
怀
Dehuai had contributed so much,
那么大的功劳，
and yet he was regarded as a right opportunist.
一份子吗？就从家里
So
面
she found a cloth from the house
一块布，找了一些棉
and some
花，
cotton. Stitch by stitch, she sewed 2 thick knee pads
护的两只护心，再罚
so that he could use it when kneeling for punishment.
好受。
It might make it easier. After experiencing more than 20 struggle sessions, big and small, 2 years into the Cultural Revolution, Zhang Yusheng was finally released. But there was no time to take a breath from the brutal struggle. 1 month later, Fang Zhongmou was implicated in the landlord class and classified as a landlord and spy suspect and isolated for investigation in the county hospital. She appealed her case to the party constantly that her father was wronged when he was executed for being counter-revolutionary. She demanded that the class affiliation be withdrawn. However, she was ignored. For more than a year, Fang Zhongmou was detained in the hospital and prevented from going home. Her meals were brought by her children. Every morning and every night, Fang Zhongmou had to stand bowing her head to admit her mistakes and asking for punishment. The rest of the time was cleaning the toilet and disinfecting. Her feet were so swollen that she couldn't wear her shoes. 1 year later, the party decided to let Fang Zhongmou go home at night. But when his mother came home, the family felt like she had become strange and silent, often in a trance, and often forgetting to eat before going to work. On December 13, 1971, Zhang Hongbing recalls, "At the beginning of the day, it was strange and ominous. That morning, Fang Zhongmou got up and still went to work without breakfast. Zhang Yusheng was concerned about his wife and asked Zhang Hongbing and his younger brother to send their mother food. My brother and I exhorted her, yet she still did not eat. She told me to do one thing.
他说：“小
She
铁
said,
夫，
"Little Taifu, there are many bottles of penicillin in the drawer,
青霉素的药瓶，上面字
some with red characters
有红色的字体，
and some with blue characters.
蓝色的字体。你给我
You put the
摆出
5 words of 'Long live the Communist Party.'
5个字
Red ones were more and blue ones were fewer,
我就把
so I put out the
红
red ones with the 3 words of the Communist Party,
3个字，蓝
and
色
the
的
blue ones with the 3 words of 'Long live.'
摆了万岁2个字。反正这个觉得，我觉得
Anyway,
心里面
I felt that this was quite something.
那个的，我就
It was uncomfortable. The uneasy brothers accompanied their mother all day long until the evening when she got off work. After dinner, during the family discussion on the situation of the Cultural Revolution, my parents suddenly argued.
简直像
It
炸
was
了一
so
样。
acrimonious.
谁想到能
Who thought she could say that out of her mouth?
他说
She said this,
万岁
"Long live has changed its color,"
改变颜色了，就是我在
which were the 2 words I
检阅
put on the table at the laboratory of the county hospital.
摆的那个字，万岁
Long
2个字
live. It happened to be the blue ones you put out. Yes. What was the most chanted slogan in the Cultural Revolution?
毛主席万
Long live Chairman Mao.
万岁，万万岁。所以他说
So, she
万
said,
岁已经改变颜色。
Long live has changed its color. The Communist Party are still red. She still believed in the Communist Party, but she didn't believe in Mao Zedong. Zhang Hongbing originally sympathized with his mother who was implicated by his grandpa before, but at this moment she was skeptical about the godlike great leader he worshipped. The loyal Red Guard was angry.
我手端
My
着
hand was holding a large yellow basin of dishes.
陶瓷
It，was ceramic,
我就说
and I said,
你再敢
"How dare you say such a thing? I'm going to hit your head with this basin." My mother was also very angry. She stared at me. "You dare. Say another word?
我把家
I'll tear up all the pictures in this house."
通通的撕毁砸碎。
The more Fang Zhongmou said, the more she got out of line. Her husband, Zhang Yusheng, already stunned, couldn't hear it anymore. Fang Zhongmou, from now on,
你就是阶级敌人。
you are the class enemy. We will draw a line with you.
你把你刚才
You write me all the words you just said.
都给我写出来。母亲呢
My mother sat on a rattan chair, picked up my father's cigarette box,
香烟盒
pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked.
从小
Since I was
到
little,
那天晚上
I had never seen my mother smoke,
但是那天
but that night, she smoked for the first time.
抽起香烟来了。
She smoked and said,
那还不好
"Is
写。
that hard to write?"
我
I
敢说
dare to say, dare to think, and dare to do,
因为我是
because I've been living up to it. Zhang Yushan made a decision immediately, denouncing Fang Zhongmou's anti-revolutionary behavior to the military delegate. My father left words when he went.
你们在家看
You
好，
watch her at home.
别让她跑。
Don't let her run away. How could he be so decisive? She was his wife, after all. That's right. Your mother went together with him through thick and thin. That's right. Sewn him the knee pads and walked him home with her hands? Yes. Did he not think of this? How my father thought of this specifically, I do not know now. Zhang Hongbing was still concerned and feared that his father still had the old way of thinking, taking feelings between husband and wife into account, and wouldn't really go to denounce. So he hastily wrote a letter of denunciation and wrapped it up with the red guard badge he had worn on a daily basis. He also went out and slipped the letter into the door of the military delegate of the county mass's dictatorship headquarters. Did you realize what result you would bring?
就是
That is to report it to the military delegate
把母亲抓起来。
and turn my mother in? Actually, before this moment, you loved her very much, sent her food every day, and always feared for her. How is the difference so big? It's that big.
从幼儿园
From kindergarten to primary school,
所
the
受到教育
education we received, it was
爹亲
Mommy and Daddy can't compare with Chairman Mao.
谁要是
Whoever
反
opposes him, they are our enemy.
敌人，
This person in front of you at this time,
他变成了
she
魔
became
鬼
a。devil. In my eyes, she was the class enemy.
我对他是
I felt no mother-son attachment with her in my heart
那种母子的心恋的感情啊。
because of those two words. That's right. Overnight, this loving mother suddenly became insane.
墙上的一张毛泽东的
A
画
painting
像
of Mao Zedong on the wall was burned by my mother.
点火烧掉了。
The father and son jointly denounced and sent their loved one to the execution yard.
那个军
The
代表
military delegate, the platoon leader, kicked on my mother's ankle.
完一脚，母亲
My mother
砰
dropped down to the ground on her knees, wrapped up like a rice dumpling.
听到了母亲的尖
I heard my mother's shoulder making a cracking sound. The bloody smoke has vanished. Decades later, the secret of his mother has reopened its scar.
这条路
The road
往
went
前
ahead to that fence gate.
栅栏门，那就是现
That
在
is
的
the present Guzheng County Hall.
公审我
The
母亲
public
的
trial of my mother was held on this playground.
召开的。
我在这个里面，
In here? That's right.
它这个就是
This was the venue at the time.
当时一
It
片
was a
广
square
场，
with yellow mud at the time.
这一个
The square was
广场里
full
面
of people.
全部都是人，哎，特别是那个
Especially
囚
when
车
she
押
was
来
brought by the
囚车
truck.
押来的时候，大家都想
Everyone wanted to see it.
我应该是
I should have squeezed from the crowd to the front left of the podium,
左前方有个
which was
10
10
米
meters
远
away.
的地方，看到了母亲，
I saw my mother. Did your mother see you?
他们
She didn't see me
也不会想
and wouldn't have thought
我会来
that I
看
would come to see her. How did you feel when following the truck, step by step towards the end of your mother's life?
难以形容，
Indescribable. Not a single word can describe that.
有
There was fear
恐惧、无
and
奈，
helplessness,
有
and there was
要坚持。
Perseverance. You just knew to follow. Yes, yes, follow. I walked to the execution yard, but I wouldn't go and watch the bloody scene.
淋漓那一幕，我绝不
I
看。
wouldn't do that. Why? Instinctive rejection.
是一种本能。
Instinct?
是
Yes.
张宏斌今年
Zhang
63
Hongbing,
岁。
63 years old this year, from Guzhen, Bangbu, Anhui. For over 40 years, he has repeated the same ritual, time and time again, returning to a compound at his hometown, to go back to the road that leads to the compound. Nowadays, it has become bustling downtown streets, but in the eyes of Zhang Hongbing, the blood will never fade away here. On April 11, 1970, the compound was full of people. On that day, his mother was placed on public trial here, sentenced to death for anti-revolutionary crime, taken to the execution yard in the suburbs, and executed immediately. Now, 46 years have gone by. The case that shocked the whole county at the time has been buried in the dust of history. Yet the memory of Zhang Hongbin, unceasingly and again, looks back at the path of death that his mother walked in the end. The road between the public trial meeting and the execution yard is less than 2 kilometers. Zhang Hongbin has walked it numerous times, searching for his vanished, mysterious mother. This is the old house of my family.
我家的旧居，一共
There
是
are 3
3间
rooms in
房。
total.
这房子还
The
没
house
变，
has
还
not
是原来的
changed, and it is still the same. But in the past, there was a window, not a door. Zhang Hongbin lived here with his parents until he was 15 years old. It left the best memories of Zhang Hongbin's life. It also witnessed his most unforgettable night. After the Cultural Revolution broke out, his mother, Fang Zhongmou, carried the brand of her father, who was executed as a landlord and a spy in the land reform campaign and was confined in the county hospital and put into custody for investigation for more than a year. On the night of February 13, 1970, when the family was discussing the Cultural Revolution, his mother, Fang Zhongmou, suddenly and emphatically criticized the leader. In an act of madness, a painting of Mao Zedong on the wall
还有毛
and
主席
calligraphy of poetry of Chairman Mao
诗词手记
were
都被
taken
母
down
亲
by my mother,
取出来撕下来，
and she tore down and burned them all.
这时候父亲
Then my father was even more angry. "Hit the anti-revolutionary," he said to me. I was holding a rolling pin in my hand, and I was shocked.
怎么能对
How could I do it to my mother? I couldn't do it. I struck her on her back. You might have done it subconsciously at the time. Yes, I did it subconsciously. I was trembling all over my body. My teeth were striking against each other uncontrollably. What did she look like at the time? "Long live the Communist Party," she cried. Fang Zhongmou's reactionary behavior shocked the family. Zhang Hongbin, the eldest son, was an avid and loyal Red Guard at the time, and it was absolutely intolerable that his mother insulted the great leader. He and his father, Zhang Yusheng, immediately decided to denounce Fang Zhongmou. At the end of the long denouncement, Zhang Hongbin and his father both wrote the words, "Execute Fang Zhongmou." On the same day, Zhang Yusheng wrote an application for divorce and an application for renouncement on behalf of his son. Fang Zhongmou did not hesitate to sign them.
变成了一
She
个
became a devil with a terrifying appearance, not a person.
獠牙的魔鬼，不是人了。
Not to mention it was your mother. Yes, not to mention it was my mother and the person I loved. There was a kind of relief. I finally got rid of the burden of anti-revolutionary and landlord class status.
包袱了。哎，我
I
还
would go
回
back
到
to the class of the poor and middle peasant.
这个阶级成分
The class
真是太
status was a
了不
big deal.
阶级斗争是
The
你
class
死我
struggle was a matter of life and death. I only thought of her as the class enemy. I should draw a line with her, that something like human feelings and love no
不
longer
存在
existed.
了都不存在
No longer existed. They were gone.
零散
Placing righteousness above family loyalty, Zhang Hongbin was established as a model of revolution and delivered a speech at a struggle session for his mother. Others made comics based on Zhang Hongbin's revolutionary story, which was displayed in the Revolutionary Exhibition Hall of Guzhen County. Zhang's family behaved so extremely that many people in this small county town pointed the finger at the fact that they betrayed their family. Some people thought Zhang Yusheng must have had another woman. With all these groundless rumors, Zhang Hongbin also had some self-doubts. Did I really make a mistake? With all these self-doubts, he would again be shamed of his lack of determination to revolution. In the midst of these constant mood swings, the divorce decree and death sentence issued by the courts were delivered to the Changs. On April 11, 1970, before the execution of Fang Zhongmou, a large public trial was held in Guzheng County. Among the rough crowd, there was Zhang Hongbing, 16 years old. In terms of my mental state, it was on the verge of collapse. I felt dizzy and giddy. My head was buzzing. I couldn't even walk at that time. Looking at the kneeling person surrounded by so many people, did you think it was your mother? It is my mother, but I can't escape. She wasn't terrifying in appearance anymore and became a human being. My mother. My heart was trembling. Was it your mother who was the only one executed that day? Only her. That's right. At the time in the venue, it was about here that the truck came out. Over here. We followed this road to go after the truck. The truck was running ahead, and people were chasing the truck behind. They wanted to catch up as soon as possible and wanted to see the scene of the execution. I was among the huge crowd. It was sandstone roads at the time. We can't tell right now. That's right. Such a bustling place. The landscape has completely changed. After Fang Zhongmou died, the Changs and Fangs completely broke off their relations. The Fangs suffered the hit. The second sister died in anger, and the Changs hadn't been blessed because of righteousness above family loyalty. The class status of family of a counter-revolutionary never left them. The pressure was on them like an invisible mountain. After Zhang Hongbing and his brother graduated from junior high school, they didn't get to enter the factory, pursue studies, or become a soldier, and were sent to the countryside to work instead. Zhang Yushen again experienced 2 more punishments and dismissals in different campaigns. They lived in fear. In 1976, the decade of turbulent years came to an end. In the next 2 years, the era of the rule of the extreme left thought also ended. Reflection and criticism of the Cultural Revolution became a common practice. And by that time, Zhang Hongbing had become a young bench worker, heavy-hearted and in torment. He was in a state of extreme depression. What did it end up with? I couldn't speak to my father and brother at home in words. I walked quietly to the Huahe Bridge in Wuhui County. Under the bridge, there was the turbid river running. I didn't know how deep it was. I wanted to climb the railing and jump, leaving everything behind. The change in the situation, yes, made you feel lost. Yes, you couldn't find a stance in your heart. Yes, it's true. And I had a habit of keeping a journal. I couldn't do it at this time. What would I write? What would I say? You got lost all of a sudden. Yes, no way to go. At the end of 1978, Fang Maikai, brother of Fang Zhongmou, who hadn't seen them for many years, came to the Changs suddenly. At that time, the rehabilitations of the Cultural Revolution were being carried out from the central authorities to the local ones. Fang Maikai wanted a redress of grievances for his sister. He asked for a report from that year to write rehabilitation material for his sister. However, Zhang Guosheng refused. Not long after, Zhang Hongbing and his father read the news of Zhang Jixin's rehabilitation and had a deep sigh. Zhang Hongbing finally understood that the self-doubt in his heart over the years was not unusual. He said to his father, "We did the wrong thing that year." I wrote night after night, stayed up all night, and I cried as I wrote. I regretted. You realized it was wrong. The step of admitting mistakes is painful. Yes. Because this is not an ordinary mistake. Yes. It is a mistake that couldn't bring a life back. Yes. It was like the pain of cutting your heart with a knife. My little aunt came to my house, and we cried in each other's arms. Cried in each other's arms. It was a heavy rain at the time. Mother is a word that has disappeared in Zhang Hongbing's life for nearly 10 years. The Changs were not very vocal about this after Fang Zhongmou died. Zhang Yushang destroyed all the photos and writings related to Fang Zhongmou. And nearly a decade later, when this almost erased mother came back again, everything haunted Zhang Hongbing intensely. He worked at the factory during the day and wrote all night. That year, he wrote another report, and this time, it was an appeal and rehabilitation material. Everything he wrote that year put his mother on the cross. And now, every single word that once hit his mother like a nail has bounced back, like they were nailed into his body. I felt great pain deep in my heart. Zhang Hongbing wrote in misery for nearly a month, 61 pages. He read the first draft to his father. My father thought about it and said, "What we did then was a little bit inhumane." In the 1980s, Zhang Hongbing was admitted to the Chinese literature department at the local university. One day, while taking an ancient literature class, he read The Apes Say, written by Song Liang, a collection of essays from the Ming Dynasty. It was like being struck by lightning. There was a kind of ape. The huntsman caught the mother. After that, he skinned it. The young monkey saw his mother ending up like this. He resisted. He was grabbing and crashing around until finally the young monkey was dead too. He concludes this article that the apes acted so. What about people? So when I read this article, I hurled myself in my heart. Zhang Hongbing, you're no better than animals. There's kinship in animals. And there's the mother and son love. What about you? Do you have it? It was the most heinous crime. Guilty beyond forgiveness. I didn't think of her feelings at that time. Now I know. I often dream of my mother. One night, my mother suddenly came to me again. I feared she would disappear soon. And I held my mother's hand. And I cried, "Mom, don't go." I held her hand, and I was crying. I told her, "Mom, I am sorry. I am sorry. I am really sorry." However, Mom didn't talk. Not a word. She disappeared in the blink of an eye. During the rehabilitation of his mother, Fang Zhongmou, one thing had been deeply disturbing to Zhang Hongbing. In his impression, his mother had always been a devoted revolutionary
这下面
and always actively demanded for progress. But before the incident, why did she act more and more abnormally? On the night of February 13, 1970, why did she become suddenly hysterical and act in such a mad way? Having reviewed the denouncement materials from his father and himself, those dust-laden details and revealed truth made Zhang Hongbing like awakening from a dream. In 1949, Fang Zhongmou, aged 23, influenced by her father, Fang Zhongmou, an underground party member, joined the PLA, took part in the Yangtze River crossing as a nurse, and was awarded the second-class merit. But 1 year later, in the land reform movement in her hometown, her father was executed as a landlord and a spy. And Fang Zhongmou was also implicated, and was considered a spy suspect and internal control target. To prove her revolutionary loyalty and join the party as soon as possible, she also denounced her father to the party and made a request to cut ties with her landlord-class family. She constantly reformed her thinking, was active and committed at home, and was promoted to the deputy director of the outpatient department in Guzheng County Hospital. 1966, the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, was the most glorious year in the Zhang's political life. Zhang Fang, the oldest daughter of Fang Zhongmou, was elected as a student representative of Guzheng County to attend Mao Zedong's 8th reception of the Red Guards. However, in less than a week back from Beijing, Zhang Fang died of meningitis infection acquired from the trip. My mother simply could not bear the blow. When she met her colleagues, she cried and talked about her child, Zhang Fang, how good she was. She was just like Xianglin from Luzhun. According to her brother Fang Maikai, after Fang died, Fang Zhongmou said to him, "Why did they start the Cultural Revolution and get students in the Great Networking? If all students stayed in school and studied, Zhang Fang wouldn't have died of this disease." And then she didn't get out of the pain of losing a daughter. The husband and wife suffered further shocks. Her husband, Zhang Yusheng, was placed in a dunce cap and criticized. During the struggle session with her husband, Fang Zhongmou was also beaten. Then she was again implicated by her father's status, regarded as a spy suspect, isolated for investigation in the county hospital, and confined. Each day she pled guilty at the gate of the hospital. More than a year later, she was allowed to go home to have meals and sleep. After she returned this time, what she said and did were becoming increasingly strange. Since February 7, 1970, she was mentally and emotionally abnormal. Like she couldn't often sleep. Mentioned her late daughter, Zhang Fang, several times and cried, and forgot things when doing housework. She had a habit of washing her face before sleeping every day. She washed her face twice sometimes, and talked in a topsy-turvy way. The double whammy of disillusionment, fiery faith, and a cruel life finally crushed Fang Zhongmou. On the night before the incident, Fang Zhongmou, who had previously cut ties with her father, suddenly said her father's death was an injustice. On the night of the incident, she suddenly argued with her husband and son, and she was stricken and completely went out of control. But because of the thinking of the time and lack of medical and psychological knowledge, her intense and abnormal demeanor was treated as blatant reactionary acts by a shocked father and son. With the denouncement, it eventually led to her execution because of anti-revolutionary crimes. Many times, I went back to this place and I was heavy-hearted. It was unbearable to remember. It was, after all, the place where I sent my mother to the guillotine. Hello, Aunt Wang. We've been neighbors for so long. You're as old as my mother. Do you know Lawyer Chang's mother? She was a good person. During the Cultural Revolution, going here and there, his mother carried a bag and went to the hospital for sterilization. It was all her. Almost everyone else left the hospital, and she was the only one there. What did you think of her after what happened to her? I didn't see it. After the death of her oldest daughter, She must have been stricken.
这都还是田野嘛。
It's still a field out here.
过去都是这样
It
的
was all
地
the fields like this.
刑场就在
The execution yard is just ahead.
我母
At
亲
the
当
time,
时
my
呢
mother was taken here by the truck
行车被押到这儿
and
来，
executed
在这
here.
地方执行死刑，然后留
Then
下
there
一
was a
滩
pool
血
of blood. Probably this is the location.
就在这儿。
Is it here?
就在这边
Yes, here. Here.
是在这吗？
Is it here? What happened to your mother's body? After her death, there was a neurotic man, and he tied her to himself and then ran about. At that time, they simply didn't collect the body. It was just left in the execution yard. No collection, that's right. In 2013, an article entitled "An Unfilial Son in the Cultural Revolution" ignited the internet. Its author is Zhang Hongbing. This personal history with the deep-seated pain Zhang Hongbing had intended to hide. But one day, he saw online posts that the Cultural Revolution was good and let's do it again, and other comments. He couldn't keep silent anymore. In the article, like what he did in the Righteousness Above Family Loyalty report, he detailed everything that occurred on the cruel night of 1970.
我愿意
I'm
做一
willing
个
to be an example of what not to do. I took this terrible tragedy that happened in my family
惨绝人寰的惨剧，展现
and showed it to the world
世人来看，把这一
and
块
unveiled the bloody scar to the world
伤疤揭开来给人看，让大家
to
思
let them
考
think.
为什么
Why did such a human tragedy occur in this family?
这样的人间悲剧？怎样
How
才
can
能
we avoid the repetition of this tragedy? Upon publishing, Zhang Hongbing's confessions set the cat among the pigeons. Many people couldn't understand it. They cursed and berated him with the most malicious words. Zhang Hongbing didn't argue at all. He thought that these criticisms could not offset the crime he committed against his mother. Some people would say it was caused by the times, not by yourself. In terms of responsibilities, the social responsibility is attributed to the society. The family's one is attributed to the family. The individual one is attributed to the individual. You're not going to let yourself go? No, you're right. I'm not going to let myself go.
我是
I should carry this heavy cross.
应该背上这个沉重的十字架。这个十字架
This cross isn't gone because I'm openly saying this now.
说出这件事情，它就消失了。它将
It will
永
always
远
be on my shoulders.
由我肩负着，一步一步的
Going
往前
forward
走，
one step at a time
一直到我
until the day I walk into my grave.
天。
In a diary entry from 1993, Zhang Hongbing wrote one thing. One day, his father mentioned that one of his old colleagues once said, "You and Fang had been married over a decade. You shouldn't have reported her." Sang Yushen answered him, "Fang Zhongmou could say it at home. She would also say it outside. If she did, it would have implicated us in it. If we didn't handle her, they would have handled us. It was the political situation at the time." Finally, he said to Zhang Hongbing, "Your mother was a good person." This was more than 20 years after his mother died, one of the rare moments that his father mentioned his mother. However, Zhang Hongbing thought even if his father did not report the case at the time, he would have gone too. It was his passion and determination that pushed his father to that step too. His father died in 2003. Zhang Hongbing constantly asked himself, he was a good child when he was young, and his nature was not bad. Why did he push her to the road of ruin? What exactly made him lose his basic humanity and affection? And what kind of mood did his mother die in? How did she think of this mother and son? Did she forgive him? These questions, all of his life, he wouldn't find the answers. Long gone with the vigorous and burning times. However, Zhang Hongbing did not want to reconcile with the past. He followed his mother's path to death again and again, and felt his mother's last moment again and again. He said that perhaps only pain would make him feel that he hadn't forgotten his mother. And only this self-torture would make him pay a little bit of price for his mother's death. In 1951, when my father and mother got married, they bought this leather case. It was a pair of them. This scarf was worn by my mother. Your mother wore it? The scarf my mother wore, this woolen scarf. When my mother was isolated for investigation, she used this cup and the spoon. This is the lid of her enamel bowl. And then this is what we buy grain with. The bag we went to the grain station to buy grain with at the time. The patch on it was mended by my mother. The stitches are very tight. Sometimes I wonder if I didn't do this stupid thing at the time, my mother would be just only over 80 now. If she was still alive and see our family of adults and children, how joyful would she be?